May 12, 1944, Allied bombers reach deep into Germany to attack war industries and transportation lines. Fighter aircraft of the German Luftwaffe rise to meet the bombers in furious air battles. Luftwaffe Gruppe Commander Günthher Rall, the third highest scoring ace in history, leads his Me-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s against the Allied bombers and fighters. For Rall, it will be a fateful day. On the same day, Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, leader of the U.S. Army Air Force's 56th Fighter Group, known as Zemke's Wolfpack, leads his P-47 fighters into battle protecting the Allied bombers. He is employing a new tactic for the first time, a tactic that will shift the tides of the air war. Lieutenant Robert "Shorty" Rankin flies with the 56th Group that day. In that single mission, he becomes a double ace, destroying 5 enemy aircraft. One of those aircraft is flown by Günthher Rall. This is the story of the German ace who stood up to his Nazi dictator. How a merchant son from the Black Forest became the third highest scoring fighter pilot in history. How he survived 3 wars and 621 combat missions. How he refused direct orders from Hermann Göring and lived to tell about it. And how the enemies who tried to kill each other in the skies over Germany became brothers for life. This is the incredible story of Günthher Rall. March 10, 1918. The Black Forest village of Gaggenau, Germany. Günthher Rall is born into a world at war. World War I has been raging for nearly 4 years. Germany is losing. The economy is collapsing. People are starving. 7 months later, on November 11, 1918, the fighting ends. Nearly 10 million soldiers are dead, an estimated 13 million civilians have died as a result of the war. Millions more are displaced from their homes. The major empires of Europe cease to exist. The German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires are broken. Their far-flung colonies and much of their European territories divided among the victors. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in May 1919, annexes parts of Germany to Belgium, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Italy. The treaty limits the size of Germany's army and navy, outlaws a German submarine fleet, prohibits Germany from maintaining an air force. Most of the fighting had taken place in Belgium and France. There, the loss of property and the economic upheaval are catastrophic. The Treaty of Versailles calls for huge reparation payments from Germany. France insists that the treaty include a war guilt clause. The clause forces the German nation to accept full responsibility for starting the war, to assume liability for all the damages the war has caused. The crushing reparation payments shatter the fragile German economy. German marks become worthless. Personal savings are wiped out for middle-class people. 7 million Germans are left jobless. The Treaty of Versailles imposed so many cruelties on this country that the outcome couldn't have been anything else but dictatorship, Rall would later say. People were starving. The economy was down all the time because the reparations that had to be paid, mainly to France and to the other countries that had won World War I, were so immense that the economy couldn't ever recover. And if people starve, they are likely to fall prey to anybody who promises them better. And this is, in simple terms, the way that led to Hitler. The German people feel humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. They are crushed by unemployment and hyperinflation. By the 1930s, political instability and economic depression leave the German public disillusioned with the Weimar Republic, the democratic government set up after World War I. With keen political skill, Adolf Hitler builds the Nazi Party into a mass movement that appeals to German traditions of nationalism, militarism, discipline, and the supremacy of the state over individuals. Once elected, Hitler renounces the Treaty of Versailles and begins rebuilding Germany's military forces. Behind the scenes, he silences or crushes any opposition and maneuvers himself into absolute power. He cut unemployment, and that was the most important thing everybody wanted him to do, Rall later explained. That was why he was elected finally. What people did not see was what happened behind the scenes. Where did all those unemployed go? They went straight into the arms industry, or they went into the construction industry, building highways, autobahns in Germany, which were a first-hand military infrastructure. They didn't see it. What could be seen on the surface was this man kept every promise he ever made, so no wonder he had been elected and re-elected. A fair election didn't take place because he just thought we can go on better without elections anymore. And nobody opposed, of course. Günther Rall is just 14 years old when Hitler is elected Chancellor of Germany and assumes dictatorial power. You know, I was a young guy in those days, Rall recalled, but I think their aim was how to, by political measures, get an improvement of the whole situation, means primarily economically, politically. And no member of any other party was idolized like Hitler and his party. He was a great leader. No word against him, no critique against him. What he said, this was right, no doubt. The first thing implemented by Hitler after taking power is a ministry of propaganda. Under this ministry, all of the information industry is centralized within half a year. There is only one radio channel completely controlled by the Nazis. All of the print industry, all newspapers, all magazines are under control of a censor that sits in the Ministry of Propaganda. It is strictly forbidden by law to listen to foreign radio stations. You could get into prison if someone tells the authorities that you are listening to BBC London or even to a Swiss broadcasting system. The first thing they try is to limit the Germans' view on the outside world and make them think in the direction the Nazi Party has decided that people should think. Hitler manages to reduce unemployment within 2 years to less than 1 million. He is cheered upon as if he has magical powers. Most of the people think, this Jewish thing is really disgusting, but basically he seems to be the right man at the right place. They want somebody who recovers the economy, who brings people back to work. He delivers on all of his promises. And most people think, once he is at power and once he has to deal with these huge problems, he will forget about that Jewish thing. He does not. Rall's mother is a devout member of the Lutheran Church. His father is a merchant who is away from home much of the time. Like most German people, Rall's parents support the Nazis' economic programs but do not join the Nazi Party. As a young man growing up in the Black Forest, Günther Rall is an accomplished athlete in track and field events. He receives a classical education in languages and science. In 1928, at age 10, Rall joins the German Christian Scout movement. Scouting becomes one of the main influences on his young life. When the Christian Scouts are absorbed into the Hitler Youth movement in 1934, the Scouts themselves see little change. "We changed the shirt, you know," Rall remembered. "We had a gray-blue uniform. Now we wore a brown uniform. But the leaders were the same. The program was pretty much the same. Camping, sports, that kind of thing. We didn't see it as political at first. But slowly, the Hitler Youth becomes more militarized, more focused on preparing young men for war. By the late 1930s, membership is mandatory for all German youth. Rall excels in the physical training. The discipline appeals to him, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose. But even as a teenager, he notices things that trouble him. The anti-Jewish rhetoric, the book burnings, the increasing control over every aspect of German life. His mother raises him with strong Christian values. She teaches him to think for himself, to question authority when it conflicts with conscience. These lessons will save his life and his soul in the years to come. In 1936, at age 18, Rall faces a decision. He wants to be a doctor, has dreamed of it since childhood. He applies to medical school. He is rejected. The reason, he is not a member of the Nazi Party. His family is not politically active. In Hitler's Germany, that is becoming a liability. Rall is devastated. His dream is crushed by politics he wants no part of. Then he sees an advertisement. The new Luftwaffe, Hitler's rebuilt air force, is recruiting officer candidates. No political affiliation required, just youth, health, and intelligence. Rall applies, is accepted immediately. He tells himself it's temporary. A way to serve his country while figuring out what to do next. Maybe after a few years, the political situation will calm down. Maybe he can still become a doctor. He has no idea he's making a decision that will define the rest of his life. October 1936. Rall reports to the Luftwaffe flight training school at Neubiberg. He is 18 years old, eager, nervous, excited. The training is intense, physical conditioning, classroom instruction on aerodynamics, navigation, meteorology. Then, finally, flight training. Rall's first flight is in a glider. The instructor tows him aloft, releases the line, and Rall is alone in the sky for the first time. The silence is profound. No engine, just the whistle of wind over the wings, the sensation of floating, soaring, completely free. He is hooked. Rall progresses quickly through training. He has natural aptitude, good reflexes, excellent spatial awareness. He thinks three-dimensionally, can visualize maneuvers before executing them. By 1938, he is flying powered aircraft. By 1939, he earns his wings and is commissioned as a lieutenant. He is assigned to Jagdgeschwader 52, Fighter Wing 52, the unit that will become the highest-scoring fighter wing in history. Rall still hopes the political situation will stabilize, that war can be avoided, that he can serve his time and return to civilian life. Then September 1st, 1939 arrives. Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. Rall is 21 years old, a fighter pilot in Hitler's Luftwaffe, and there is no turning back. September 1st, 1939. German forces invade Poland. The Luftwaffe provides air support, destroying Polish airfields and aircraft on the ground in the opening hours of the war. Rall's unit, Jagdgeschwader 52, is held in reserve. They do not participate in the Polish campaign. Rall watches from the sidelines as the war he hoped would never come unfolds with terrifying speed. Poland falls in 28 days. The world is shocked by the speed and brutality of the German blitzkrieg. Britain and France declare war on Germany. But they do little to help Poland. The period that follows becomes known as the phony war. Both sides prepare, both sides wait. Rall continues training, flying, preparing for combat he still hopes will never come. May 10th, 1940. The waiting ends. Germany invades France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands simultaneously. This time, Jagdgeschwader 52 is in the fight. Rall flies his first combat mission on May 12, 1940. Exactly 4 years before the mission that will nearly kill him. He is 22 years old, flying a Messerschmitt Bf-109E. The mission is a fighter sweep over France, hunting for enemy aircraft, protecting German ground forces. Rall sees his first enemy aircraft, a French Morane-Saulnier fighter. His hands shake on the controls. His heart pounds. All his training seems to vanish from his mind. The French pilot sees him first, opens fire. Rall brakes hard, nearly blacks out from the G-forces. The French fighter overshoots and disappears. Rall returns to base having fired not a single shot. He feels humiliated. Certain his commanders will think him a coward. Instead, his squadron leader tells him, "Good. You survived your first combat. That's all that matters today. Tomorrow you'll do better." He does. May 18, 1940. Rall scores his first victory. A French Curtiss Hawk 75 fighter. He approaches from behind and above, the classic attack position, fires a short burst. The French aircraft explodes. Rall feels no elation, no triumph, just relief that he survived, and horror at what he has just done. "I saw him," Rall later recalled. "The pilot, his face. For a second before the aircraft exploded, he was young, maybe younger than me, and then he was just gone." It is a moment that will haunt Rall for the rest of his life. France falls in 6 weeks. The speed of the German victory shocks the world again. The French military, considered the finest in Europe, collapses under the blitzkrieg. By June 22, 1940, France has surrendered. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. Rall has flown 36 combat missions during the French campaign. He has 3 confirmed victories. He is considered a competent but not exceptional pilot. His commanders have no idea they are watching a future legend develop his skills. The Battle of Britain begins in July 1940. The Luftwaffe attempts to destroy the Royal Air Force as a prelude to invading England. Rall's unit participates in the early stages of the battle. They fly fighter escort for German bombers attacking British airfields and radar stations. The British fight with desperate courage. Their Spitfires and Hurricanes are inferior in some ways to the Bf-109, but the British have advantages the Germans lack. They are fighting over their own territory. Downed pilots who survive can return to combat. They have radar to warn of incoming attacks, and they are fighting for survival. Rall quickly learns that the Battle of Britain is different from France. The British pilots are skilled, aggressive. They won't break and run. On August 15, 1940, Rall nearly dies for the first time. He is escorting bombers to an airfield near London when British fighters attack. A Spitfire gets on his tail. Cannon shells tear through his aircraft. The instrument panel explodes. The canopy shatters. Rall's left thumb is nearly severed. Blood fills the cockpit. He can barely see, can barely think through the pain. He dives for the channel, somehow makes it across, crash lands in a French field. He spends 3 months recovering. The doctors save his thumb, but it will never work properly again. For the rest of his life, Rall will fly combat missions with a crippled left hand. Most pilots would take a medical discharge, return to non-combat duties. Rall returns to his unit in November 1940. The Battle of Britain is essentially over. Germany has failed to destroy the RAF. The invasion of England is postponed indefinitely. Rall has flown 47 missions over Britain, shot down 1 Spitfire, been shot down once himself. His score stands at 4 victories, respectable but unremarkable. Then everything changes. June 22, 1941. Germany invades the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. 3 million German soldiers, 3,000 tanks, 2,000 aircraft, attacking along a front stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Jagdgeschwader 52 is assigned to the southern sector, supporting Army Group South. Their mission, destroy the Soviet Air Force, provide air cover for German ground forces. Rall flies his first mission over Russia on June 23, 1941. The second day of the invasion. What he sees changes everything he thought he knew about war. The Soviet Air Force in June 1941 is massive but obsolete. They have thousands of aircraft, but most are outdated designs flown by poorly trained pilots. German fighters slaughter them. In the first week of Barbarossa, the Luftwaffe destroys over 2,000 Soviet aircraft. Most are destroyed on the ground. Those that do get airborne are easy prey for German fighters. Rall shoots down 3 Soviet aircraft in his first week over Russia, then 5 more the following week, then 7 the week after that. The kills come so fast he stops feeling anything. No horror, no remorse, just the mechanical act of getting on their tail and pulling the trigger. It was a turkey shoot, Rall later admitted. The Russians were brave, incredibly brave, but they were flying obsolete aircraft with minimal training. We just killed them. By August 1941, Rall has 18 victories. By September, 36. By October, 50. He is becoming an ace of aces, one of the highest scoring pilots in the Luftwaffe. But the easy victories don't last. The Soviets are learning. New aircraft are arriving. The Yak-1, the Lag-3, the MiG-3. Not as good as German fighters, but better than what they had. More importantly, the Soviet pilots are learning. Those who survive their first few missions become dangerous opponents, hard, aggressive, willing to ram German aircraft if ammunition runs out. The weather becomes an enemy too. The Russian winter of 1941 to 1942 is the coldest in decades. Temperatures drop to 40 below zero. Aircraft won't start. Guns freeze. Men freeze. Rall experiences cold unlike anything he knew existed. The kind of cold that makes your teeth crack, that makes breathing painful, that kills you if you're outside too long. Despite the conditions, the missions continue. The Luftwaffe is ordered to support the German advance on Moscow, to destroy Soviet aircraft, to strafe Soviet ground forces. Rall flies through it all. 2, sometimes 3 missions a day, taking off from frozen airfields, landing on ice, fighting in conditions that should have grounded all aircraft. November 28, 1941. Rall is leading a flight of 4 Bf-109s on a ground attack mission near Rostov. They strafe a Soviet supply column. Soviet anti-aircraft fire is intense. Tracers fill the sky. 1 shell hits Rall's aircraft. The engine explodes. Rall has seconds to react. The aircraft is on fire, losing altitude. He can't bail out. Too low. He has to crash land. He aims for a field, pulls back on the stick to flare. The Bf-109 hits the frozen ground at 150 miles per hour. The impact is catastrophic. Rall's back breaks in 3 places, his shoulder shatters, ribs crack, his face smashes into the instrument panel, blood fills his mouth, the aircraft cartwheels, wings tear off, the fuselage tumbles end over end. When it finally stops, Rall is still strapped in the cockpit, upside down, on fire. He can't move, can't unbuckle, can't escape. German soldiers from a nearby unit see the crash. They run to the wreckage, pull Rall from the burning aircraft seconds before it explodes. Rall is unconscious, not breathing. They think he's dead. A medic starts chest compressions, breathes into his mouth, pounds on his chest. Rall gasps, coughs blood, starts breathing. The medic saves his life. They take him to a field hospital. The doctors examine him and shake their heads. His back is broken, his shoulder shattered. Internal injuries they can't fully assess. If he survives, he'll never walk normally again, never fly again, never fight again. They ship him back to Germany, to a military hospital in Stuttgart, tell his family to prepare for the worst. Rall spends 5 months in the hospital, learning to walk again, learning to use his shattered shoulder, fighting pain that makes him scream. The doctors tell him his flying days are over, that he should accept a desk job, that he's lucky to be alive. Rall refuses. He exercises obsessively, pushes through pain that would break most men, teaches himself to compensate for his injuries. By April 1942, he is walking without crutches. By May, he is doing physical training. By June, he demands to return to flight status. The Luftwaffe Medical Board examines him. His back is still weak. His shoulder has limited mobility. His injuries should disqualify him. But Germany is losing pilots faster than they can be replaced. The Eastern Front is a meat grinder. They need every experienced pilot they can get. They clear him for limited duty, not combat, just training missions, ferrying aircraft, easy assignments. Rall returns to his unit in August 1942. They're stationed in southern Russia, supporting the German offensive toward Stalingrad. He's supposed to fly training missions, stay out of combat. On his first day back, his squadron encounters Soviet fighters. The squadron leader is shot down. The formation breaks apart in confusion. Rall makes a decision. He takes command, orders the scattered fighters to form on him, leads them into the fight. In the next 10 minutes, Rall shoots down 2 Soviet Yak-1 fighters, reorganizes his squadron, brings everyone home safely. His commander is furious. Rall disobeyed orders, flew combat when restricted to non-combat duties. But Rall had saved the squadron, shown leadership under fire, proven he could still fight. They lift the combat restrictions. Rall returns to full combat status in September 1942. The Battle of Stalingrad is reaching its peak, the most brutal urban combat in history. The Luftwaffe flies constant missions, close air support, interdiction, fighter sweeps. The pilots are exhausted, flying 3-4 missions a day. Rall flies through it all. His score begins climbing again, 60 victories, 70, 80. By December 1942, he has 90 kills. He is one of the highest-scoring aces in the Luftwaffe. Then winter arrives again, and with it, disaster. The Soviet counteroffensive encircles the German 6th Army at Stalingrad. 300,000 German soldiers trapped. The Luftwaffe is ordered to supply them by air. It is an impossible task. The Luftwaffe doesn't have enough transport aircraft. The weather is terrible. Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft fire destroy transport after transport. Rall flies escort missions for the transports, watches them get shot down, watches German soldiers starve, watches the 6th Army die. On February 2, 1943, the last German forces at Stalingrad surrender. Over 91,000 soldiers march into Soviet captivity. Only 6,000 will survive to return home. The Eastern Front has turned. Germany is no longer advancing. Now, Germany is fighting for survival. Rall continues flying, continues fighting. His score continues climbing. 100 victories, 125, 150. By April 1943, he is the second highest-scoring ace in the Luftwaffe. Only one pilot, Erich Hartmann, has more kills. But the war is changing. The Soviets have better aircraft now, better pilots, better tactics. The easy victories of 1941 are long gone. Every mission is a fight for survival. Every victory is hard won. Rall develops his own tactics, his own philosophy of air combat. Never follow an enemy down, he teaches his pilots. Get in one good pass and break away. The second pass is when they kill you. Fight like a team, never alone. Always have someone watching your back. Altitude is life. Speed is life. Situational awareness is life. His pilots listen. They survive. The ones who don't listen die. By late 1943, Rall has over 200 victories. He is promoted to major. Given command of 3rd Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader 52, he is 25 years old, commanding hundreds of pilots, responsible for a significant sector of the Eastern Front. The responsibility weighs on him. Every pilot he loses feels personal. Every empty seat at briefings is a knife in his gut. He writes letters to families, tells them their sons died bravely, doesn't tell them their sons died in a war Germany is losing, in a cause that isn't worth their sacrifice. Because by late 1943, Rall knows the truth. Germany is going to lose this war. It's just a matter of time. The question is, how many more have to die before it ends? November 1943. Rall's 3rd Gruppe is stationed in southern Russia near the Crimea. The German retreat continues. What was once an offensive army sweeping across the steppes has become a defensive force fighting to hold every mile. Rall flies multiple missions every day. Intercept Soviet bombers, escort German ground attack aircraft, strafe Soviet positions, protect German forces as they withdraw. The Soviets outnumber them 10-1, sometimes 20-1. But the German pilots are veterans, experienced, skilled. Rall's score continues climbing, 220 victories, 240, 260. Each number represents a life ended, a Soviet pilot who won't go home, a family that will receive a letter saying their son is missing. Rall tries not to think about it, tries to see them as just targets, as the enemy, not as human beings with families and dreams and futures. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Hitler pins the medal on Rall's uniform, shakes his hand, tells him he is a hero of the Reich, that Germany is proud of him. Rall says thank you, salutes, says nothing more. Later, a friend asks him what it was like to meet Hitler. He had dead eyes, Rall says quietly, like a shark. No humanity there, just emptiness. It is one of the first times Rall admits, even to himself, that he is fighting for a cause he doesn't believe in, for leaders he doesn't respect, in a war that should never have been fought. But he returns to the front anyway, because his pilots need him, because abandoning them would be worse than continuing to fight, because at 25 years old, Günther Rall doesn't know how to be anything other than a fighter pilot. I looked into the faces of most of the guys I had to kill, Rall would say decades later, tears running down his face. The air war on the Eastern Front took place at altitudes below 5,000 to 10,000 feet, and nobody wore an oxygen mask. And when you engaged, you came across the guy before you turned in. And I could see them. And a minute later, they were dead. December 1943. Rall receives orders to report to Germany, to Berlin, to Luftwaffe High Command. He assumes he's being reassigned, pulled from the Eastern Front, maybe given a training command. Instead, he receives a decoration, the Knight's Cross, with oak leaves and swords, one of Germany's highest military honors, presented personally by Adolf Hitler. Rall stands in the Reich Chancellery, in the presence of the Führer himself, surrounded by Nazi officials, by men who have sent millions to their deaths. January 1944. The Soviet winter offensive pushes German forces back across Ukraine. Rall's Gruppe flies from improvised airfields, sometimes from frozen fields with no facilities at all. The conditions are brutal. Pilots sleep in their aircraft to keep warm. Food is scarce. Fuel is scarcer, but they keep flying, keep fighting. Rall shoots down his 251st aircraft on March 28, 1944, a Soviet Yak-9 fighter. The kill is quick, clean, professional. He feels nothing, no pride, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. By April 1944, Germany has bigger problems than the Eastern Front. American and British bombers are devastating German cities. The Americans bomb by day, the British by night. German industrial capacity is being systematically destroyed. The Luftwaffe is ordered to transfer experienced fighter units from the Eastern Front to defend the Reich, to stop the bombers. Jagdgeschwader. 52 is split up. Some units remain in Russia, others are sent west. Rall's 3rd Gruppe receives orders in late April 1944, transferred to Germany. New mission: intercept American bomber formations, stop the strategic bombing campaign. Rall has mixed feelings. He's leaving the Eastern Front where he's fought for 3 years, where he's become one of the highest-scoring aces in history. But he's also escaping the meat grinder, the endless retreat, the knowledge that every victory is ultimately meaningless because Germany is losing. May 1st, 1944. Rall's Gruppe relocates to Wiesbaden, Germany. They're equipped with a mix of Bf-109Gs and some new Fw-190 fighters. Their mission: intercept American heavy bomber formations attacking German industrial targets, specifically the synthetic oil refineries that fuel the German war machine. Rall quickly learns that fighting American bombers is nothing like fighting Soviet fighters. The American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators fly in tight formations, combat boxes, with overlapping fields of fire. Each bomber has multiple .50 caliber machine guns. Attacking them head-on means flying into a wall of lead. Attacking from behind means staying in the kill zone longer. Worse, the American bombers have fighter escorts: P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings. The P-51 is particularly dangerous. It has the range to escort bombers all the way to targets deep inside Germany and back. Fast, maneuverable, heavily armed. German pilots call them the long-nosed bastards. They're learning to fear them. Rall adapts his tactics. He studies American formations, identifies weaknesses, develops new attack techniques. Hit them fast and hard, he tells his pilots. One pass from high altitude. Dive through the formation. Don't stick around for a second pass. The escort fighters will kill you. But there's a problem. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe and one of Hitler's closest associates, has different ideas about tactics. Göring orders German fighters to ignore the American escorts, focus exclusively on the bombers. "Attack! Attack! Attack!" he screams at his commanders. It's a death sentence. Göring's tactics get German pilots killed in droves. Rall ignores the orders. He teaches his pilots to engage the escorts first, clear the sky of P-51s and P-47s, then attack the bombers. His pilots survive. Other units following Göring's tactics are slaughtered. This creates tension between Rall and Luftwaffe High Command. They hear that he's not following orders, that he's teaching defensive tactics instead of aggressive attack. Göring summons him to headquarters. The meeting does not go well. May 10th, 1944. Rall stands in Göring's office. The Reichsmarschall sits behind his desk, wearing one of his elaborate uniforms covered in medals. Göring is furious. He's heard that Rall's Gruppe has been avoiding combat with American bombers, that they're more interested in dogfighting with escorts than destroying the bombers. "You are cowards," Göring screams. "You are failing the Reich. You see the American fighters and you run." Rall stands at attention, says nothing, lets Göring rant. "I am ordering you personally," Göring continues, "to ignore the escort fighters. Go straight for the bombers. I don't care if you lose aircraft. I don't care if you lose pilots. You will destroy the bombers." There is a long silence. Every officer in the room is holding their breath. No one contradicts Hermann Göring. No one questions his orders. Günther Rall, 26 years old, looks the Reichsmarschall in the eye and says, "No." The room freezes. Göring's face turns purple. "What did you say?" "No, Herr Reichsmarschall," Rall repeats calmly. "I will not follow those orders. Those tactics will get my pilots killed for no gain. I will engage American escorts first, then attack bombers when it's tactically sound." Göring stands up. He's shaking with rage. "You dare refuse a direct order? I could have you shot for this." There is a long silence. Every officer in the room is holding their breath. No one contradicts Hermann Göring. No one questions his orders. Günther Rall, 26 years old, looks the Reichsmarschall in the eye and says, "No." The room freezes. Göring's face turns purple. "What did you say?" "No, Herr Reichsmarschall," Rall repeats calmly. "I will not follow those orders. Those tactics will get my pilots killed for no gain. I will engage American escorts first, then attack bombers when it's tactically sound." Goering stands up. He's shaking with rage. "You dare refuse a direct order? I could have you shot for this." Rall doesn't flinch. "Then shoot me, Herr Reichsmarschall. But I will not throw away my pilots' lives on tactics that don't work." The other officers are terrified. They expect Goering to call guards, to have Rall arrested on the spot. Instead, something strange happens. Goering stares at Rall for a long moment, then he sits down, waves his hand dismissively. "Get out. Get out of my office." Rall salutes, turns, walks out. He expects to be arrested within the hour, to be court-martialed, to be sent to a punishment battalion on the Eastern Front. Nothing happens. Goering never mentions the incident again, never issues disciplinary action. Apparently, even Hermann Goering knows better than to punish one of Germany's highest-scoring aces in the middle of a losing war. But the confrontation cements Rall's reputation. Word spreads through the Luftwaffe. Major Rall stood up to Goering, refused a direct order, and got away with it. Younger pilots idolize him. Senior commanders are wary of him. Goering hates him. Rall doesn't care. He has one priority: keep his pilots alive as long as possible in a war Germany cannot win. May 12, 1944, the day that will change everything. American 8th Air Force launches a massive raid against Germany's synthetic oil industry. Over 900 bombers, over 700 escort fighters. The target, oil refineries across Germany. The mission, cripple Germany's ability to produce fuel. Without oil, German armies cannot move. German aircraft cannot fly. The war will be over. Colonel Hub Zemke, commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group, has a new tactic. He calls it the Zemke Fan. Instead of flying close escort around the bombers, his P-47 Thunderbolts will fan out ahead of the bomber stream. Engage German fighters before they can attack the bombers. Aggressive, offensive, the opposite of defensive escort tactics. Lieutenant Robert Shorty Rankin is flying with Zemke's group that day. He's a skilled pilot with 4 victories already. Today he's hunting for his 5th, the kills that will make him an ace. Günther Rall is also in the air that day, leading his 3rd Gruppe of JG-52. Flying a Bf-109 G6, he has 273 victories. He's tired. His back still hurts from the 1941 crash. His crippled left thumb makes it hard to operate the throttle. But he's in the air because that's what he does. That's who he is. The two forces are on a collision course. At 11:47 hours, Rall's formation spots the American bomber Stream. Over 200 B-17s and B-24s in tight combat boxes. Rall orders his fighters to climb, get above the bombers, prepare to dive through the formation. Standard tactics, the tactics that have worked for 3 years. But something is different today. At 11:52 hours, P-47 Thunderbolts appear above and ahead of the German fighters. They're not escorting the bombers, they're hunting. Zemke's fan is sprung. The P-47s dive into the German formation. Chaos erupts. The carefully organized German attack falls apart. Rall breaks right, tries to rally his fighters, but the Americans are everywhere, aggressive, fast, attacking from multiple angles. This isn't the defensive escort fighting the Germans have learned to handle. This is something new, something dangerous. Rall gets on the tail of a P-47, lines up his shot, fires, misses. The Thunderbolt breaks hard and disappears in the confusion. Then Rall sees another P-47 below him, alone, vulnerable. He dives, gets into firing position. His finger moves to the trigger. He never sees the P-47 above and behind him, the one flown by Lieutenant Robert Rankin. Rankin has been stalking Rall for 30 seconds, waiting for the perfect shot, waiting for Rall to commit to his attack and become vulnerable. Now. Rankin fires. 8.50 caliber machine guns converge on Rall's Bf-109. The first rounds hit the engine. The cowling explodes. Black smoke pours back into the cockpit. More rounds tear through the fuselage. The canopy shatters. Rall feels impacts all around him. His right hand, his good hand, explodes in pain. A .50 caliber round has smashed through it, shattered bones, torn flesh, blood everywhere. Rall's aircraft is dying, engine failing, controls not responding, blood filling the cockpit. He has seconds to react. He rolls inverted, jettisons the canopy, falls out of the aircraft into the freezing air at 23,000 feet. His parachute deploys. He floats down toward Germany below. His right hand is ruined, his left thumb already crippled from 1940, his back broken from 1941. Günther Rall's war is over. On the ground, German soldiers find him in a field, rush him to a field hospital. The doctors examine his hand and shake their heads. The damage is catastrophic. Bones shattered, tendons severed, nerves destroyed. They can save the hand, but it will never work properly again. Rall will never fly combat again. Never fight again. The third highest scoring ace in history has been shot down by a 23-year-old American pilot on his way to becoming an ace. Lieutenant Rankin doesn't know who he shot down, doesn't know he's just ended the combat career of a legend. He just knows it's his 5th victory. He's an ace now. The mission continues. For Rankin, it's a triumph. For Rall, it's the end. But for both men, it's just one day in a war that will continue for another year. A war that will kill millions more before it ends. May 12, 1944, a German field hospital somewhere in Bavaria. Günther Rall lies on a surgical table. His right hand is a mangled mess of shattered bone and torn flesh. The doctors work quickly, trying to save what they can. They remove bone fragments, repair tendons, stitch torn arteries. It takes 4 hours. When Rall wakes up, his hand is wrapped in bandages, immobilized. The doctors tell him what he already knows. He'll keep the hand, but it will never work properly again. 2 fingers are permanently stiff. The thumb has limited mobility. The grip strength is gone. Combined with his crippled left thumb from 1940, his broken back from 1941, Rall is medically finished as a combat pilot. The Luftwaffe Medical Board grounds him permanently. No appeals, no exceptions. Günther Rall, 26 years old, with 273 aerial victories, is done fighting. Most pilots would be devastated, would see it as the end of their career, the end of their purpose. Rall feels something different, something he doesn't expect: relief. He's been fighting for 3 years on the Eastern Front, 1 year defending Germany. He's survived crashes, injuries, hundreds of missions against impossible odds. And he's tired. Bone-deep tired, tired of killing, tired of watching friends die, tired of fighting for a cause he no longer believes in. The injury gives him an honorable way out. No one can call him a coward. No one can say he didn't do his duty. He's earned his exit from the war. But the Luftwaffe isn't done with him. June 1944. While Rall is recovering, the Allies land in Normandy, D-Day. The liberation of Europe begins. Germany is now fighting on 3 fronts, the Soviets advancing from the east, the Americans and British from the west, the strategic bombing campaign from above. The Luftwaffe is being destroyed. Experienced pilots are dying faster than new ones can be trained. Fuel is scarce. Aircraft production is falling. Germany needs every experienced pilot it can get, even the wounded ones. Rall receives new orders. Report to the fighter weapons school at Bad Aibling, not to fly combat, to train the next generation of fighter pilots. It's a rear echelon job, safe, far from the fighting. Rall accepts. What choice does he have? July 1944. Rall arrives at Bad Aibling. The school trains new fighter pilots and tests new tactics and aircraft. Rall is assigned to teach aerial combat tactics, to pass on everything he's learned to pilots who will replace the ones being killed. It's strange being on the ground, watching others fly, knowing that many of the young men he's training will be dead within months. But Rall throws himself into the work. If he can't fight anymore, he can at least prepare others to survive. He teaches them everything: energy management, deflection shooting, situational awareness, how to survive when outnumbered. The first rule, he tells every class, is don't die. Everything else is secondary. A dead pilot helps no one. Fight as a team, never alone. The lone wolf gets killed. 1 good pass is worth 10 bad ones. Get in, shoot, get out. Don't get greedy. The students listen. They're young, eager. Most have less than 100 hours of flight time. They're being sent into combat against American and British pilots with hundreds of hours of experience. Rall knows most of them will die. The thought makes him sick. But he trains them anyway, gives them the best chance he can. August 1944. Rall receives a visitor, Colonel Hub Zemke. Except Zemke isn't a visitor, he's a prisoner. Zemke was shot down in October 1944, the dates are confused in Rall's memory, and sent to Stalag Luft 1. But before that, in August, Zemke was still fighting, still perfecting the aggressive tactics that were destroying the Luftwaffe. Actually, Rall doesn't meet Zemke until much later. But he knows about Zemke, knows about the 56th Fighter Group, knows about the tactics that got him shot down. Rall studies American tactics obsessively, not to fight them. He can't fly anymore, but to understand them, to teach his students how to counter them. He realizes the Americans have changed the air war fundamentally. The Zemke fan, the aggressive fighter sweeps, the long-range escorts. The Luftwaffe is still thinking defensively. The Americans are thinking offensively. And the offensive side is winning. September 1944. Rall's hand is healing slowly. The infection that plagued it for months has finally cleared. He has limited use of the fingers, can grip objects weakly. He starts flying again, not combat, training flights, familiarization with new aircraft. The Luftwaffe has captured some American aircraft, P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings. They're used as target aircraft. German pilots practice against them to learn their capabilities. Rall flies them all. He's amazed, the P-51 especially. Touching all the characteristics and criteria, he later said, the P-51 was the best one. Better than the Bf-109, better than the FW-190, better than anything Germany has. The Americans are outproducing Germany, out-training Germany. And now, Rall realizes, they have better aircraft too. Germany has already lost this war. It's just a matter of how much longer it takes for everyone to realize it. October 1944. The Battle of the Bulge is being planned. Hitler's last desperate offensive in the West. The Luftwaffe is ordered to support it, to provide air cover, to attack Allied ground forces. It's a suicide mission. The Luftwaffe barely has enough fuel to fly. The Allies control the skies. German pilots are being killed faster than they can be replaced. But orders are orders. Rall watches as his students, boys he trained just months ago, are sent to the front. Most will be dead within weeks. November 1944. Rall receives new orders. Report to Fighter Leader School at Bad Wurishofen, not as a student, as the commanding officer. The school trains squadron and group commanders, teaches tactics and leadership, prepares officers to command fighter units in combat. It's a promotion, more responsibility, more prestige, and it takes him further from the fighting. Rall accepts. December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge begins. The Luftwaffe throws everything it has into supporting the offensive. Operation Bodenplatte, the last major Luftwaffe offensive, is launched on January 1, 1945. Nearly 1,000 German fighters attack Allied airfields in France and Belgium. The Germans destroy over 300 Allied aircraft on the ground, but they lose over 270 of their own fighters. More importantly, they lose experienced pilots, irreplaceable pilots. The Luftwaffe never recovers. Rall watches from Bad Wurishofen, trains more commanders, sends more pilots to die. The war is clearly lost now. Everyone knows it, but no one dares say it out loud. January 1945. Soviet forces are advancing into Germany from the east. American and British forces are advancing from the west. German cities are being bombed around the clock. The railroad system is collapsing. Food is scarce. Fuel is scarcer. The Fighter Leader School continues operating, training commanders for units that barely exist anymore. For a war that's already lost, Rall does his job. What else can he do? February 1945, Rall receives orders to report to Berlin, to Luftwaffe High Command. He assumes it's another medal ceremony, another propaganda event. It's worse. He's being given a new command, JG 300, a night fighter unit defending Germany against British bombers. Rall protests. He's not qualified for night fighting. He's a day fighter pilot. His injuries limit his capabilities. The protests are ignored. Germany needs experienced commanders. Rall is experienced. He's ordered to take command immediately. March 1945. Rall arrives at JG 300's base. The unit is in shambles. Aircraft are damaged. Fuel is almost gone. The pilots are exhausted. Morale is non-existent. Rall does what he can, reorganizes, improves training, builds morale. But he knows it's futile. The war will be over in weeks, maybe days. The only question is, how many more have to die before Germany surrenders? April 1945. Soviet forces are fighting in the outskirts of Berlin. American forces are across the Rhine. The Third Reich is collapsing. Rall's unit has almost no fuel, almost no ammunition. The pilots are flying missions with barely enough fuel to take off and land. On April 20th, Hitler's birthday, Rall receives orders to launch a maximum effort against Allied bombers. He looks at the order, looks at his pilots, looks at the fuel trucks showing nearly empty. He makes a decision. He orders the unit to stand down, to save their fuel, to wait. For what? His adjutant asks. For the end, Rall says quietly. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker in Berlin. May 7th, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. Günther Rall has survived. 621 combat missions, 273 aerial victories, 3 major crashes, multiple injuries, 3 years on the Eastern Front, 1 year defending Germany. He's 27 years old, and he's alive. Rall answers honestly, Eastern Front, defense of the Reich, fighter pilot. He knew about the persecution of Jews, everyone knew, but he didn't know about the death camps, not until after the war. The French don't believe him at first. How could a German officer not know? But they investigate. Find no evidence of war crimes, no connection to atrocities. After 3 weeks, they release him. Rall returns home, unpacks his suitcase, tries to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. He's 27 years old. His country is destroyed. His career is over. His hands are crippled. He has no job, no prospects, no future. What does a fighter ace do in peacetime? June 1945. Rall marries his fiancée, Hertha Schön. They'd been engaged since 1942, but waited until the war was over. She's a nurse, strong, practical. She doesn't care about aerial victories or medals. She just wants to build a life. On May 8th, Rall orders his pilots to destroy their aircraft, to prevent them from falling into Soviet hands. They roll the fighters into a line, set them on fire, watch them burn. Years of war, thousands of hours of combat, all ending in flames. Rall watches the smoke rise, feels nothing, just emptiness. The war is over. But what comes next? May 10th, 1945. Rall returns home to Gaggenau, to his parents' house in the Black Forest. The village is occupied by French forces. Germany is divided among the Allies. The country Rall fought for no longer exists. He's a veteran of the Luftwaffe, one of the highest-scoring aces in history. In Nazi Germany, that made him a hero. In occupied Germany, it makes him suspect. The French authorities arrest him. Not as a war criminal, he's never committed any war crimes, just as a former Wehrmacht officer. They interrogate him. Where did you serve? What did you do? What did you know about the camps? They rent a small apartment in Gaggenau. Rall finds work where he can. Manual labor, construction, anything to earn money. It's hard. His hands make it difficult to do physical work. His back limits what he can lift, but he perseveres. At night, he has nightmares, sees the faces of the men he killed, hears the screams of pilots burning in their aircraft. Hertha holds him when he wakes up shaking, tells him it's over, tells him he's safe. But Rall doesn't feel safe. He feels lost. 1946 to 1953. The years pass slowly. Rall works various jobs, never stays long. The work doesn't satisfy him. Nothing satisfies him. He misses flying, misses the camaraderie, misses having a purpose. But former Luftwaffe officers aren't allowed to fly. Germany isn't allowed to have an air force under the Allied occupation. Rall tries to adapt to civilian life, fails, tries again. He and Hertha have children, 2 daughters. Rall loves them desperately. They give him a reason to keep going. But he's still lost, still searching for purpose. Everything changes. West Germany is admitted to NATO. The Western Allies want Germany to rearm, to help defend against the Soviet Union. A new German Air Force, the Bundesluftwaffe, is being created. They need experienced pilots, experienced commanders, men who know how to fight. Günther Rall receives a letter. Would he be interested in joining the new Luftwaffe? He's 36 years old. His hands are still crippled. His back still hurts. He hasn't flown a combat aircraft in 10 years. He says yes immediately. September 1955. Rall reports for duty with the new Bundesluftwaffe. He's commissioned as a major, the same rank he held in 1945. The new Luftwaffe is nothing like the old one. No Nazi ideology, no aggressive war, just defense, just NATO. Rall helps build it from the ground up, develops training programs, establishes procedures, recruits pilots. It's familiar work, good work, work that matters, and he gets to fly again. The new Luftwaffe flies American aircraft, F-84 Thunderjets, F-86 Sabres, later F-104 Starfighters, jet aircraft. Faster than anything Rall flew in the war. More complex, more dangerous. Rall adapts quickly. Despite his crippled hands, he learns to fly jets, earns his qualification, gets back in the fight, except there's no fight anymore. Just training, just exercises, just preparation for a war that never comes. It's enough. 1956 to 1970. Rall's career in the new Bundesluftwaffe advances steadily. He's no longer a combat pilot. His injuries prevent that. But he's a leader, a strategist, a teacher. He rises through the ranks. Lieutenant colonel, colonel, brigadier general. Each promotion brings more responsibility, more authority, more impact on the new German Air Force. Rall helps select aircraft for the Luftwaffe, develops doctrine, trains the next generation of German fighter pilots. But this time, it's different. These pilots aren't being trained to conquer. They're being trained to defend, to protect democracy, to stand alongside former enemies as allies. It's strange for Rall. Flying alongside American pilots, British pilots, men who would have been trying to kill him 15 years ago. But it's also right. The old hatreds are gone. The old divisions are fading. They're all just pilots now, professionals, brothers in arms. Rall is promoted to Major General, given command of the German Air Force Tactical Command. He's responsible for all tactical fighter operations in West Germany, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of personnel, a critical part of NATO's defense of Western Europe. It's the kind of responsibility he never had during the war. During World War II, he commanded a Gruppe, roughly 40 aircraft. Now he commands entire air wings, but the principles are the same. Take care of your people, train them well, give them the tools they need, lead from the front. Rall applies the lessons he learned in combat, the tactics he developed fighting the Soviets and the Americans. But now he's developing them to fight alongside the Americans, against the Soviets. History has a sense of irony. Rall is assigned to NATO headquarters. He becomes Chief of Staff for Allied Air Forces Central Europe. It's a political job as much as a military one. He has to work with Air Force commanders from multiple nations, balance competing priorities, navigate international politics. Rall discovers he's good at it. His combat record gives him credibility. His experience gives him authority. His personality, calm, professional, focused on results, earns respect. American generals who fought against Germany in World War II now work alongside Rall. Some are initially skeptical. A former Luftwaffe ace in NATO command? But Rall wins them over. He's professional, competent, dedicated to the mission. And he has no illusions about the past. He doesn't defend Nazi Germany, doesn't make excuses, doesn't pretend the war was anything other than a catastrophic mistake. "We fought for the wrong side," he tells one American general, "but we fought honorably, and now we're on the right side. That's what matters." The American general, a bomber pilot who flew missions over Germany, nods slowly, extends his hand. They shake. Former enemies, now allies. Rall is promoted to lieutenant general, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Bundesluftwaffe. He oversees NATO air defense for Central Europe, coordinates exercises, develops contingency plans for Soviet attack. The Cold War is at its height. The threat is real. Soviet forces outnumber NATO in conventional forces. If war comes, the NATO air forces will have to hold the line until reinforcements arrive. Rall prepares for a war he hopes will never come. Trains pilots for combat he prays they'll never see. It's exhausting work, mentally draining. The stakes are impossibly high. But Rall does it, because someone has to. because he has the experience, because he knows what war really costs, and he's determined that if war comes again, NATO will be ready. At age 57, Günther Rall retires from the Bundesluftwaffe. He served for 21 years in the new German Air Force, longer than he served in the old one. He's gone from major to lieutenant general, from fighter pilot to NATO chief of staff. He's helped build a new Germany, a democratic Germany, a Germany that defends freedom instead of destroying it. It's a good legacy, a legacy he's proud of. At his retirement ceremony, NATO commanders from a dozen nations attend. American generals, British air marshals, French commanders. They speak about Rall's contributions, his professionalism, his dedication. One American general, a former P-51 pilot, tells a story. In 1944, I flew missions against the Luftwaffe. I saw what they could do. They were the best fighter pilots in the world, and General Rall was one of the best of the best. Now, 30 years later, that skill and experience has been used to defend freedom, to protect democracy, to build an alliance that has kept the peace in Europe for 3 decades. General Rall represents the best of what Germany has become, a nation that learned from its mistakes, that chose democracy over dictatorship, that became a force for peace instead of conquest. It has been an honor to serve alongside you, General. Rall stands at attention. His eyes are wet. He salutes. The American general returns the salute. Former enemies, now brothers. Retirement should mean rest, relaxation, time with family. It's awkward at first. Old tensions, old memories. But they start talking, sharing stories, comparing experiences. They realize they have more in common with each other than with people who never flew, who never fought. They're all pilots, all warriors, all survivors. The reunions become annual events. Rall attends everyone. He becomes close friends with former American pilots, men who tried to kill him, men he tried to kill. Now they're drinking beer together, laughing, sharing photos of grandchildren. The event that will define Rall's later life. A meeting is organized in Costa Mesa, California. 3 veterans, 3 pilots who faced each other in the skies over Germany on May 12, 1944. Günther Rall, Hub Zemke, Bob Rankin. But Günther Rall can't sit still. He becomes active in veterans organizations, attends air shows, gives lectures about aerial combat. He's contacted by historians, writers, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wants to know about the highest-scoring aces, about the tactics, about the war. Rall answers their questions honestly. He doesn't glorify war, doesn't romanticize combat. People think being an ace was glamorous, he tells one interviewer. It wasn't. It was killing, day after day, mission after mission, watching friends die, killing men who were just doing their jobs, same as you. I'm proud of my service, proud I did my duty, but I'm not proud of the war. That war should never have happened, and I spent the rest of my career trying to prevent it from happening again. 1980s. Rall is contacted by an organization trying to bring together former World War II pilots, German, American, British, former enemies. The idea is to promote reconciliation, understanding, peace. Rall agrees to participate. He attends his first reunion in 1985. Former Luftwaffe pilots meet former US AAF and RAF pilots. It's the first time Rall has met the men who shot him down. The first time Zemke and Rankin have met the legendary German ace they fought. The organizers are nervous. Will there be tension, resentment, anger? The 3 men meet in a hotel lobby. Rall recognizes Zemke from photos. Zemke recognizes Rall. Rankin knows both by reputation. There's a moment of silence. They study each other. Then Rall smiles, extends his crippled right hand. "I believe you gentlemen have something of mine," he says in heavily accented English. "About 40 bones from my hand." Rankin looks shocked. I'm sorry, Rall laughs. "Don't be sorry. You were doing your job. I was doing mine. You were just better that day." The tension breaks. They shake hands, start talking. Within hours, they're friends. "We spent 5 good days together," Rankin later recalled. "We became friends immediately, and we have been friends ever since." They talk about the mission, the tactics, the fight. Rall describes being shot down, the pain, the injury, the long recovery. Rankin describes the attack. He'd been stalking Rall, waiting for the perfect shot. He'd been nervous, attacking a German ace with 270-plus victories. "You were good," Rankin says. "If I hadn't caught you focused on that other P-47, you'd have killed me." Rall nods. "Probably. I was too focused on my target. Forgot to check 6. First rule of air combat. I taught it 1,000 times, and I forgot it when it mattered." Zemke tells them about the Zemke fan, how he'd developed the tactic, how it changed the air war. Rall's fascinated. "We never understood what you were doing. One day, the American escorts were passive. The next day, aggressive. It confused. U.S. disrupted our attacks." That was the point, Zemke says. They talk about the war, about what came after, about how strange it is to be friends with men who tried to kill them. "A fighter pilot has a personal relation to his enemy," Rall explains. "He sees him, man to man. We had real dogfights in Russia because you could see his face. So we respected each other. He fought for his country. I fought for mine. We had personal contact in the air, so you have a personal relationship. And this is why fighter pilots after the war became friends. It's typical." The three men pose for a painting. The artist recreates the moment on May 12, 1944, when Rankin shot down Rall. In the painting, Rankin's P-47 is above and behind Rall's Bf-109. Tracers arc between them. It's the moment before Rall is hit. The three men sign the painting. Former enemies, now friends. Over the next 15 years, they meet regularly, attend air shows together, give joint presentations. Audiences are amazed, the hunter and the hunted, the commander and his wingman. The men who fought in the skies over Germany now standing together. Promoting peace, promoting reconciliation, promoting understanding. "I love this country," Rankin tells audiences, speaking of America. "And every young person who lives here should be blessed to know they've been so fortunate to be born here. And when the time comes, if you have to do your thing for your country, you better damn well step up to the bat and do it." Then he gestures to Rall. He feels the same about his country. Rall nods. 3 wars and I'm still here. I'm 88. I feel fine. I'd go tomorrow and fight, but I wouldn't fight against Günther." He pauses. "Against Hub, against Shorty, never against my brothers." The audiences always applaud. Some weep. It's a powerful message that enemies can become friends, that war doesn't have to define us forever. That reconciliation is possible. 2000s. Rall is in his 80s now. His health is declining. The injuries from the war are catching up to him. His back causes chronic pain. His hands barely work. He uses a cane to walk, but his mind is sharp, his memory clear, his passion for flying undiminished. He continues attending reunions, air shows, speaking engagements. He's contacted by a publisher. They want him to write his autobiography. Rall is reluctant. Who wants to read about an old fighter pilot? Everyone, the publisher says. Your story needs to be told. Rall's autobiography, My Logbook, is published. Kurt Bratz is his editor and publisher. The book is honest, raw, unflinching. Rall doesn't glorify the war, doesn't hide from the truth. He writes about the victories and the defeats, the courage and the fear, the pride and the shame. He writes about the men he killed, the faces he saw. Bratz remembers one evening while working on the book. They were sitting on the porch, whiskey in hand after a long day of work. Suddenly, into the silence, Rall said, "You know what? I looked into the faces of most of the guys I had to kill." Tears ran down his face. Bratz asked why. The air war on the Eastern Front took place at altitudes below 5,000 to 10,000 feet. Nobody wore an oxygen mask. When you engaged, you came across the guy before you turned in, and I could see them, and a minute later they were dead. Bratz was surprised. At first glance, Rall seemed like a cold-cut warrior, but if you knew him better, you understood. "It really bothers them," Bratz said of World War II veterans, "and will bother them till their last breath." The book receives critical acclaim. Veterans praise its honesty. Historians praise its accuracy. Readers praise its humanity. Rall gives interviews, does book signings, tells his story to a new generation. Young people are amazed. This old man with crippled hands and a cane shot down 273 aircraft, led hundreds of pilots in combat, stood up to Hermann Göring. Yes, and lived to tell about it. April 4, 2009, Bad Reichenhall, Germany. Günther Rall dies peacefully in his sleep. He's 91 years old. His wife Herta is beside him. His daughters are there, his grandchildren. He's surrounded by family, by love, by the life he built after the war. The news spreads quickly. Aviation organizations, veterans groups, NATO, the Bundesluftwaffe. Tributes pour in from around the world. American pilots who fought against him, British pilots who respected him, German pilots who served with him. NATO issues a statement. Lieutenant General Günther Rall was a warrior, a leader, and a builder of peace. He served Germany with honor in war and helped build an alliance that has kept the peace in Europe for over 60 years. He will be greatly missed. The funeral is held at a small church in Bad Reichenhall. Hundreds attend. German generals, American pilots, former enemies, current allies. Bob Rankin is there. Hub Zemke died in 1994, but his family sends representatives. They bury Rall with military honors, a German honor guard, rifle salute, taps played on a bugle. Fighter jets from the Bundesluftwaffe fly overhead in missing man formation. 4 jets. One breaks away and climbs into the clouds. It's the traditional salute to a fallen aviator. Rankin stands at attention, tears streaming down his face. He's 87 years old. He came from America to say goodbye to the man he shot down 65 years ago. The man who became his brother. After the funeral, Rankin is asked about Rall. He was the finest man I ever knew, Rankin says. Enemy, friend, brother. He was all of those things, and I'm a better person for knowing him. The legacy of Günther Rall extends far beyond his 273 aerial victories, far beyond his rank of lieutenant general, far beyond the medals and honors. His true legacy is what he represented. The transformation of Germany, the possibility of reconciliation, the power of choosing peace over hatred. Rall was born into the ashes of World War I, grew up in the economic devastation of the Weimar Republic, came of age under Nazi dictatorship. He could have become bitter, could have embraced the ideology, could have blamed others for Germany's suffering. Instead, he maintained his humanity, his moral compass, his Christian values instilled by his mother. He fought for Germany, not for Nazism. There's a difference. Many people struggle to understand that difference. How could you fight for Nazi Germany and not be a Nazi? Rall's answer was simple. I fought for my country, for my comrades, for the men beside me, not for Hitler, not for the party. I was a soldier, that's all. Was it enough? Was it moral to fight for an immoral cause? These are questions Rall wrestled with his entire life. Questions he never fully answered, questions that have no easy answers. What we know is this: Rall fought honorably. He never committed war crimes, never targeted civilians, never murdered prisoners, never participated in the Holocaust. He was a fighter pilot. He fought other fighters, destroyed military targets. That was his war. When he learned about the death camps after the war, like most Germans, he was horrified, ashamed, angry that his service had been used to support such evil. But he never made excuses, never denied German guilt, never claimed he was just following orders. We knew about persecution, he admitted. Everyone knew. We should have done more, should have spoken up, should have resisted. But we didn't. We told ourselves it wasn't our business, that we were just soldiers, that politics wasn't our concern. We were wrong. That honesty, that willingness to face uncomfortable truths, that's part of Rall's legacy. After the war, Rall dedicated himself to building a better Germany, a democratic Germany, a Germany that would never again threaten the world. He helped create the Bundesluftwaffe, not as a tool of conquest, but as a defender of freedom. He worked alongside former enemies to build NATO, to protect democracy, to prevent another war. He could have remained bitter, could have refused to work with Americans and British, could have held grudges. Instead, he chose reconciliation, chose friendship, chose to move forward. The past is important, he said. We must remember, we must learn. But we cannot live in the past. We must build a better future. That philosophy guided his post-war career, his work with NATO, his friendships with former enemies. And it's what made his relationship with Bob Rankin and Hub Zemke so powerful. These were men who tried to kill each other, who fought on opposite sides of the most destructive war in human history. But they refused to let that define them forever. They chose to see each other as fellow pilots, fellow warriors, fellow human beings. Rankin shot down Rall on May 12, 1944, shattered his hand, ended his combat career. 47 years later, they met as friends. A couple of years back I said, "Shorty, I'll never shoot at you again," Rall joked. The friendship between Rall, Rankin, and Zemke became famous. They appeared together at air shows, aviation museums, schools. They told their story. The battle on May 12, 1944, the tactics, the fight, the aftermath, but more importantly, they told the story of reconciliation, of friendship, of moving beyond hatred. Young people would ask, how can you be friends with someone who tried to kill you? Rall's answer, because the war is over, the killing is over. He was doing his duty. I was doing mine. Now we're both old men who survived. Why should we hate each other? It was a simple answer, but profound. It challenged the narrative that enemies must always be enemies. That war creates permanent divisions. That reconciliation is impossible. Rall, Rankin, and Zemke proved otherwise. Hub Zemke died in 1994 at age 80. His son spoke about how his father's view of Germans changed after meeting former Luftwaffe pilots. When he came out of that camp after it was liberated, Zemke's son recalled, "My father, who was of German parents, hated Germans. He had suffered, and I think for a long period of time he held that grudge. He went back to Germany, and he met Baer, Barkhorn, Günther Rall, a number of the German fighter pilots that he knew he fought against, and he opened up more and more to them, and my father's whole view of Germans and the Luftwaffe slowly changed. That transformation from hatred to friendship represents the best of what came after World War II, the European Union, NATO, the longest period of peace in European history. It didn't happen by accident. It happened because men like Rall, Zemke, and Rankin chose reconciliation over revenge. Rall's story also illustrates the moral complexity of war. He was a German soldier who fought for Nazi Germany. That's an uncomfortable fact. It can't be whitewashed or ignored. But he was also a man of integrity who stood up to Hermann Göring, who refused illegal orders, who treated prisoners humanely, who never committed war crimes. He was a warrior who hated war, a fighter pilot who mourned the men he killed, a patriot who recognized his country's crimes. These contradictions don't cancel each other out. They coexist. They make Rall human. One of the most powerful moments in Rall's later life came during the interview for his autobiography. Sitting on the porch with Kurt Bratz, whiskey in hand, tears running down his face, Rall said, "I looked into the faces of most of the guys I had to kill." That statement reveals everything about who Rall was. He wasn't a psychopath who enjoyed killing. He wasn't a fanatic who dehumanized his enemies. He was a man doing a terrible job in a terrible war, and it haunted him. "It really bothers them," Bratz observed about World War II veterans like Rall, "and will bother them till their last breath." That burden, the weight of killing, even in war, is something Rall carried for 60-plus years after the war ended. He didn't talk about it publicly, didn't seek sympathy, didn't use it as an excuse, but it was there, always there. And yet, despite that burden, Rall chose to keep living, keep serving, keep contributing. After retiring from the Bundesluftwaffe in 1975, Rall could have faded into quiet obscurity, could have avoided the spotlight, could have let younger men tell the stories. Instead, he chose to engage, to educate, to use his experience to promote peace. He spoke at schools about the dangers of war, the importance of democracy, the need for reconciliation. He participated in veterans organizations that brought together former enemies. He gave interviews to historians, helping preserve accurate records of the air war. He supported aviation museums and educational programs. Until the end of his life, Rall remained committed to ensuring that the lessons of World War II would not be forgotten. "We must remember," he said repeatedly, "not to glorify war, but to remember what it costs, to remember what happens when democracy fails, when hatred triumphs, when good people stay silent." That message resonates today, in a world still torn by conflict, still divided by hatred, still struggling with the same questions that led to World War II. Rall's life offers answers. Not easy answers, not simple answers, but important ones. It's possible to fight honorably even in an unjust war. It's possible to maintain integrity under an evil regime. It's possible to reconcile with former enemies. It's possible to build something better from the ashes of destruction. It's possible to carry the burden of killing and still choose life. These are the lessons of Günther Rall's life. When Rall died in 2009, the world lost more than a legendary fighter pilot. It lost a bridge between past and future, between war and peace, between enemies and brothers. The obituaries focused on his 273 victories, his rank of lieutenant general, his service in 2 air forces. But those who knew him, really knew him, remembered different things. Bob Rankin remembered a man who greeted the person who shot him down with a smile and a joke. Former NATO colleagues remembered a professional who put alliance unity above national pride. Students remembered a teacher who never glorified war but always honored warriors. Family remembered a husband and father who carried heavy burdens but never let them crush his spirit. Aviation historians remembered a source who provided honest, accurate accounts without embellishment or excuse. Peace activists remembered an advocate who used his military credentials to promote reconciliation. All these memories are true. All are part of Rall's legacy. The question remains, how should we remember Günther Rall? As a German ace with 273 victories? Yes. As a warrior who stood up to Nazi leaders? Yes. As a builder of NATO and defender of democracy? Yes. As a man who chose friendship over hatred? Yes. As someone who carried the weight of killing for 60+ years? Yes. As a teacher who used his experience to promote peace? Yes. Günther Rall was all of these things, the contradictions, the complexity, the humanity. That's what makes his story worth telling, worth remembering, worth studying. He wasn't a saint, he wasn't a villain. He was a man who lived through extraordinary times and made the best choices he could with the information he had. Sometimes those choices were right, sometimes wrong, sometimes both at once. But he never stopped trying to do better, to be better, to build something better. After his death, the Bundesluftwaffe renamed a training facility in his honor. The Günther Rall Barracks at Wunstorf Air Base. Young German pilots train there today, learning to fly, learning to fight, learning to lead, but they also learn about Rall's other legacy, the importance of integrity, the value of reconciliation, the responsibility that comes with military power. Rall showed us, one instructor tells his students, that you can be a warrior and still be a builder of peace, that you can fight when necessary but always work toward the day when fighting is no longer necessary. NATO still uses some of Rall's tactical innovations, his emphasis on teamwork, his focus on preserving pilots' lives, his belief that the best victory is the one you win without fighting. Aviation museums around the world display Rall's uniforms, medals, and artifacts, the Bf-109 he flew, photos from his combat days, his NATO service. But the most powerful displays are the simple ones, photos of Rall with Rankin and Zemke, 3 old men, smiling, arms around each other's shoulders, former enemies, now brothers. Those photos represent everything Rall achieved after the war, everything he fought for in his second career, everything he believed about humanity's capacity for redemption. In the end, Günther Rall's life spanned 91 years. He witnessed some of the worst moments in human history and helped create some of the best. He saw the rise of Nazi Germany and helped build democratic Germany. He fought in a war that killed 50 million people and helped create an alliance that has prevented another world war for 75+ years. He killed 273 men in combat and spent the rest of his life working for peace. These contradictions don't diminish his legacy. They define it. Because Rall's story isn't about perfection, it's about perseverance, about choosing to move forward despite the weight of the past. It's about recognizing mistakes without being paralyzed by them. It's about building bridges across divides that seem unbridgeable. It's about the courage to stand up to power, whether that power is Hermann Göring ordering suicidal tactics or the temptation to hate your former enemies forever. Most of all, it's about the fundamental truth that people can change, nations can change, enemies can become friends. That's the legacy of Günther Rall. Günther. Not 273 victories, not the medals, not the rank, The legacy is hope, the possibility of redemption, the power of choosing reconciliation over revenge. When Bob Rankin stood at Rall's funeral in 2009, tears streaming down his face, he wasn't mourning an enemy. He was mourning a brother, a man who had tried to kill him in 1944 and had become one of his closest friends in the decades since. "He was the finest man I ever knew," Rankin said. "From enemy to friend to brother in one lifetime." That's the incredible story of Günther Rall, the German ace with 273 victories who became a builder of peace, the warrior who stood up to his Nazi dictator and lived to tell about it, the fighter pilot who saw the faces of the men he killed and carried that burden for the rest of his life, the veteran who chose reconciliation over hatred and changed what it means to be an enemy, the man who proved that our past doesn't have to define our future, that we can make better choices, build better relationships, create better worlds. 3 wars, 621 combat missions, 91 years of life. And in the end, Günther Rall's greatest victory wasn't in the sky over Russia or Germany. It was in a hotel lobby in California in 1991 when he shook hands with the man who shot him down and said, "You were doing your job. I was doing mine. You were just better that day." That moment of grace, of forgiveness, of seeing the humanity in your enemy. That's what makes Günther Rall's story worth telling. That's what makes it relevant today. That's why we remember. Not to glorify war, but to celebrate peace. Not to honor killing, but to honor reconciliation. Günther Rall stood up to his Nazi dictator and survived. He fought in 3 wars and came home. He killed 273 men and mourned everyone. He met his enemies and made them brothers. He lived 91 years and made them count. That's the legacy. That's the story. That's Günther Rall, a warrior, a leader, a builder of peace, a man who proved that redemption is possible, that enemies can become friends, that the best victories are the ones that end in handshakes instead of graves. May we all have the courage to make such choices, to build such bridges, to create such legacies. The sky over Germany is quiet now. No fighters, no bombers, no war. Just peaceful skies over a peaceful continent, built by men like Günther Rall who chose to make it so. That's the incredible story of the German ace who stood up to his Nazi dictator. And it's a story that will echo through history as long as there are people who believe in redemption, reconciliation, and the power of choosing peace.